a patient who was paralyzed from a car accident. And then they blindfolded him and they started touching the fingers on our hand. And he was like, that's my index finger, that's my middle finger, that's my ring finger. It was actually stimulating that area of his brain that corresponded to those areas. Meta has our hand too, and they're using it for like virtual teleoperation control. NASA wants to send it up to space so you can like do things on the International Space Station while you're on Earth. Can we afford to like make it at a price point that Medicare would cover? One, it forces us to think in a different way. But two, it also forces us to make sure that what we're making can actually be adopted by the masses. Yeah, and I think we had met probably before I even started building hands too. So you've probably seen every single version of these hands.
I have, yeah, because like I like remember like seeing like the big white one, like all these, because you would bring them to like when we'd have Christmas and stuff, you'd like just bring this thing, right? And
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, like me being interested in like technology, like with the eventually software engineering and stuff, like I was like just interested in technology in general. So it was always like, I'm like, this is pretty cool, you know? So then seeing it go from that to that, and then like seeing it turn into eventually like a whole company. I got to go see the lab and meet like, probably I met like your first employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first lab, all that. And so, you know, if you go to U of I, you see his picture all over the,
That's cool.
all over the walls. They parade him like crazy. They use him as like a
recruitment tool.
Yeah.
Come to U of I if you want to be anything like a deal.
And so he's got a good deals with them because of that. But super impressive. I mean, so he took a trip to Ecuador, when he was like 7, that story is incredible because he saw the first person with like a limb difference. And then basically what it looks like is that he just spent his whole life finding a way to build this thing.
That's how you got into it?
Yeah. So I was born in the Chicago suburbs. My parents are from Pakistan. And I was visiting for one of the first times when I was 7 years old. And that's the first time I met someone missing a limb. She was my age, missing her right leg and using a tree branch as a crutch. And it kind of served as the inspiration for all of this.
No way. That's incredible. Mm-hmm. You just dedicated your life.
Talk about a lifelong.
Yeah. And you know, I didn't know what shape it would kind of look like at that point. I mean, my goal from the beginning and what my parents always wanted me to do was to become a medical doctor, right? I mean, they didn't necessarily care what kind of medical doctor I became, but after I'd made that trip to Pakistan, I was like, well, I'd want to be the kind of medical doctor that would work with people who are missing limbs and try and make bionic limbs or like prosthetics or something like that. I mean, bionics weren't like necessarily like that popular at the time, right? I mean, in real life, right? I mean, in science fiction and like movies and Star Wars, it's always been popular, right? But the technology over the last like 20 years or so has just exploded. I mean, just like every other technology has exploded over the last 20 years, like cell phones and like cameras and all that sort of stuff. So it's no different for bionics, right? So it was really cool just being able to see kind of how technology was just exponentially growing at the same time as like this need for bionic limbs, and just combining those two things together. It's been a really cool experience.
How do you even, when you in your head when you're a kid, you're like, okay, I want to do this. I want to build bionic limbs. What's the process you went through to like find out? Okay, I need to learn this.
Yeah, and so as I was saying, right, first. The idea was that I would just become a medical doctor, right? And I would work with these patients. And so I was pre-med I went to Loyola University Chicago. I was getting a bachelor's in biology there. And it was my sophomore year that I took my first computer science class, and I absolutely loved it. And I was like, I loved everything about like coding and like making my own programs and just like being able to build stuff. And if I had just gone straight into med school and became a doctor, I wouldn't get to do any of that cool stuff, right? So I wanted to figure out how I could combine like prosthetics with technology, like computer science and engineering and things like that. And it was down the street actually in downtown Chicago. There's a hospital there. It used to be called the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, and now it's called the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. It's the #1 rehabilitation hospital in North America for I think the last like 35 or 36 years or something like that. And this was around like I was an undergrad in like 2004 to 2007, and around that time they had just made a huge breakthrough in this like new surgery that they had developed for allowing you to control bionic limbs straight from your nerves. And basically the way it worked was like this, right? Let's say I lost my arm at my shoulder, right? there are 4 major nerves that go to all of the muscles that are in my arm that come from my spinal cord, right? And they branch out into like hundreds of millions of neurons and things like that, right? But they control every little like muscle fiber that you have, right? From those 4 major nerves. And the thing is that if you lose your arm at your shoulder, you still have all that information in those nerves. They just haven't branched out into like those millions of neurons because your arm isn't there anymore, right? But that information is still in there. It's just how do you get into that information? And so what they did is that they made this surgery where they take those nerves and then they reroute them to muscles you still have in your body. Like, for example, your pecs, right? You still have your chest muscles. So they'll take like those 4 nerves, reroute them to your like pecs. And now when you imagine bending your elbow that you don't have anymore, or making a fist that you don't have anymore, like parts of your pecs will start to like contract, and then you can put muscle sensors over them and then control like a bionic arm as though you were still like controlling like your arm that you don't have anymore. And so this was absolutely nuts. And it got even crazier too. They were like alcohol swabbing the area on the patient's chest. And then the patient was like, it feels like my pinky's tingling. And the reason is that those 4 nerves, they also carry the sensory, like the touch information that comes back from your hand as well. And so those that regrew into the skin over their chest. So when you touch them on different parts of their chest, it feels like you're touching their hand that they don't have anymore. And it's just like, this is like the next level of where all this technology is heading, like these like bionic human interfaces that are like making this like transition between human and machine seamless. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And the guy who ran that lab, Todd Kuiken, at the time, the Center for Bionic Medicine, he was an MD PhD. He got like a PhD in biomedical engineering from, I think it was like Northwestern as well. And he got his undergrad at Duke. And then he got his MD at Northwestern. And then he started this whole program there. I was like, this is like one of the paths that I want to follow. Like this guy is exactly doing like what I want to be able to do. And so that became my new trajectory, right? An MD PhD focusing on like engineering and like maybe building a lab that would build these bionic limbs.
And that's like one of the coolest things about him, like as a founder that you probably don't see too often, especially like in some of those like startup spaces that, so he spent his life like figuring out how to like build this thing himself. So he actually has like the ability to do it. And in doing so, I think there's like a piece of advice to entrepreneurs that you could give. And that's that he did this like one without raising a ton of money to build it, which allowed him to build something that was like better than anything on the market for way cheaper than anything on the market, because he found ways to do it like pretty much with what he could afford to pay for himself, right? Like the parts that you use to build it. So it was a slow route, like maybe the slower route to do it, but you came out with a better product in the end.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Yeah. And you know, that's crazy too, because I'd applied to like maybe 13 or 14 different like MD PhD schools, right? So I ended up finishing my bachelor's in biology at Loyola. I got a master's in computer science there, and then I decided to teach there for a couple of years. And then I was applying to a bunch of MD PhD programs, and I actually didn't get into any of them except for what my last choice school was, which happened to be the University of Illinois, which is a fantastic school. It was just that, you know, like
the location probably. Like,
yeah, I mean, and it was like the school that like everyone in my high school went to, right? And I was just like, sure, yeah. I don't know if, but they had like this new program that they had just started for like neural engineering, right? So it's like combining engineering with neuroscience, right? Which is exactly kind of what I wanted to get into. And, but they didn't do prosthetics necessarily, right? And the closest thing they had was like these like brain caps that you would put on, right? They're called like electroencephalography or EEG caps. And so just by thinking, you can measure like brain waves and then control things like robots or like planes or something right? like that. Yeah. And so my very first project when I joined the University of Illinois was to play a game of mind checkers, where we had like, is me and my wife actually, where we would wear these brain caps, and then we built this like checkerboard that would like blink lights. And when you focus on one of these lights, you can actually detect which square you were looking at just from like the visual pattern in your brain. And we had a robot arm come and pick up the pieces. And so we could play an entire game of checkers just by like focusing our attention on the board in different places with our minds. But the thing is, that wasn't actually like prosthetics, right? That wasn't exactly what I wanted to get into, right? And the lab I was in, it was an aerospace engineering lab, and it was so super interdisciplinary, right? I like nothing that I really do has anything to do with aerospace engineering, right? But he was doing this kind of like that. My professor, Tim Brettel, he was my PhD advisor. He was doing these brain machine interfaces to control like the flight of planes and things like that. And I was like, well, this is kind of close, right? And And to go to your point from what you were saying earlier is that the thing is that, A, no one at University of Illinois was doing prosthetics at the time, and B, there's no funding for it. So, I had to figure all of that stuff out basically on my own, and then convince like my professor that like, this is the right way to do things. And man, that was rough.
But the stubbornness is respectable. Like just to stay like on that route is like pretty impressive. You weren't like, you were like, yeah, like controlling planes is too boring for me. Like, I don't want to control planes with my mind. I want to build prosthetics. like that's awesome. That's like so cool. You just, stuck to your guns. You're like, I'm doing this.
I mean, the thing is that what I found a lot with just a lot of academic research in general is that that's where it stays. Like it stays in the lab and it never actually reaches the point where it can actually be useful for people. Right.
True.
And so the thing is like with the brain cap, like mind control interface things, there's a lot of people who have tried. And the thing is, it's just not, in my opinion, at least, it's not commercially viable. No one really wants to wear like a brain cap. And I've heard that from many like giants in the field, that's the conclusion that they've come to, is that no one really wants to wear a brain cap to like do like something that's not the easiest thing to control. It's not like as seamless as you think.
Either anyways, right? Like
exactly. If you use a joystick, you can control it better than you would with like a brain cap. And it's just like the novelty factor is kind of cool. Ooh, I'm like controlling this with my mind, right? But from a practical level, no, it's not really there, right? And so I did not want that to happen with what I was working on, right? I wanted to make sure that the stuff that I was going to be working on was actually going to be useful for people, because otherwise, like, why am I even doing it, right? And so we kind of like, I kind of tailored my research more towards like, how can we build like these prosthetics for people who can actually use them, and what would they use them for? And it was like around 2013 or so that there was a huge boom in 3D printing, right? And now like every high school you go to, every like grade school even has a 3D printer. Every kid knows what 3D printing is now, which is just absolutely nuts, because when I was a kid, nothing like that even existed, right? And so we got our first 3D printer back in like 2013. It was like a MakerBot, a replicator, like R2 or something like that. And we were like, we're at one of the best engineering schools in the world. Why don't we start building our own prosthetic hands? And we'd gone through like, I think in the last 10 years, we've gone through about 9 different generations of the hand that we call marks, right? So the latest version of the hand is Mark 9 of the Ability hand. And Mark 1 and 2 were based off of open source designs from other people that we modified ourselves. And in 2014, we got the chance to go down to Ecuador, where we were working with a nonprofit organization called the Range of Motion Project. And their whole mission is to provide prosthetics to those who can't afford them in the US, Guatemala, and Ecuador. And it was like, that trip was just absolutely nuts, because it was 2 weeks of all-nighters and trying to get this hand to work. And our patient, Juan Suquillo, he had lost his left hand 35 years prior due to a landmine explosion. He was in the a border war between Ecuador and Peru, and he was in the Ecuadorian army. And like there were so many things that happened during that trip that were just completely serendipitous, that we were just like in retrospect, when you look back on it, it's just like, I have no idea how that is, like almost like fate from God or something, right? Yeah. So, it's been quite a wild journey.
Yeah. And you eventually got to the point where like in going off the open source designs and everything, and I can't remember what the cost was to make the arm, but how you were able to like find the parts to build them, like from like local, like Ace Hardwares and stuff like that to build them. And whereas like other arms out there, cost millions to create probably, and they're $80,000 a user or whatever, where your arms are covered by Medicare. And so you built them in your lab, like with local stores. Yeah.
And, not having funding, actually, it forced us to think in a different way, because it was like, we needed to be better than everyone else, but we had to do it with no resources at all, right? And so, for example, one of the things that we found out, so when we were on Mark 4 of the Ability hand, we were still fully 3D printing the hand out of plastic, right? And we thought that the biggest problem for users was going to be that the hands are too expensive, right? And that's why everyone's looking at 3D printing these hands now, right? It's going to revolutionize the field. And then when we started actually talking with the hundreds of patients and clinicians, the number one thing they complained about wasn't actually the cost. That was a huge deal, but it was that their super expensive $50K Bionic hand was breaking within weeks of them using it, because they were made out of rigid materials, right? And so the thing is that like our own hands, right? If I like hit it like it flexes out of the fingers flex out of the way. They bend out of the way and come right back. And that's one of the reasons why they're so impact resistant, right? But if you have a rigid thing, right, you're slamming that rigid thing against another rigid thing, it ends up snapping. There's a lot of stress and strains that are placed on on that finger, right? And so they end up breaking at the joints. And so we had to figure out how could we leverage the low cost of 3D printing, but still make this thing more robust than anything else that's out there. Because if you give someone like a cheap 3D printed hand, I guarantee you they're going to break it within like a day of using it. And so we found this field of robotics that was called soft robotics that was just kind of like really starting to get popular in the like academic world. And the way that worked was instead of using like hard materials like plastic and like steel and things like that, you'd use materials like silicone and rubber that are much more like your own skin and have been used in like prosthetics for like a super long time. And so there's like stores, like there's a store called Smooth On that exists in like basically every major city. And you can just go in there and they basically do like Hollywood prosthetics. And it's just like 2-part silicones that you can buy for like $25 and you just mix them together. And then you've got like silicone that's really cool and works really well. You can dye it whatever color you want. And so we 3D printed molds and started using these like low cost silicones, and then like we could take our fingers, we could smash them against tables. I could hit them with a hammer. And now we've done like flaming board breaking with it. I've dropped the hand 30 feet in the air. It survived. Like we put in a dryer for 10 minutes. It's gone through a lot.
It's incredible. Yeah. And like, it was like one of the first ones with like the touch feedback, right?
Yep.
So the first time that he could put it on someone, they could feel like how hard they were gripping or that kind of thing, like not to break an egg type of thing.
Yeah.
So like, and does that have to do with like the material, or is that?
So that was a consequence of the silicone. Yeah, because we had the soft silicone in there, we could actually embed touch sensors in there and make it feel like when you're pushing against the silicone that you can actually sense how much you're pushing on there. And so we relay that. We can relay that in many different ways. The most common ways we do it through a vibration motor that's in the socket, right? So like in the forearm, we'll place a vibration motor. So if you're missing your arm below your elbow, then you'll feel it up here. And when you touch the fingers, you'll feel a vibration. And so you'll know like when you've touched an object, when you've let go of an object, and how hard you've pressed on that object. And our first patient in the U.S. He's an Army sergeant, lost his hand in Iraq in 2005 due to a roadside bomb. And he used a hook on a daily basis, right? Technology that hasn't changed since like the Civil War era of the United States. So we wanted to upgrade him to the 21st century. And with our hand, he was actually able to feel his daughter's hand. And he couldn't do that with any other prosthetic. And when he told us that, I mean, I was just like, this is why we do what we do.
Yeah, that is incredible.
It's just crazy that like this is a field that most people would think not to go and disrupt. Like, right? It's like it's kind of taken up by these huge billion-dollar companies selling prosthetics for years and years. Like no one would think like, oh, prosthetics, I could do that. And he ended up making the best one on the market, right? So the touch feedback, the durability, all these things, like just sourcing stuff from the area.
What was
like, that's crazy.
Was the inspiration for the haptic feedback or the touch feedback, was that baked in the original plan, or did you just think about that once you had the silicone in there?
You know, it was a little bit of a lot of things, right? And so some of it was also that one of the good things about coming through the research world. So while one of my big qualms about going through like academics and things like that is that nothing ever comes out of the lab, right? Like it always just stays in there. But what it does give you is it gives you a sense of where all of this technology is heading in a way that if you weren't in academia, if I didn't do the PhD, I wouldn't know that like as deeply as I do. And so there are a lot of research groups at the time. There was like a huge DARPA, like the Department of Defense DARPA funded program called the DARPA Haptics program. And it was all about doing these implanted electrodes that would directly stimulate your nerves so that you could actually feel like, again, if you were missing a hand or if you were paralyzed or whatever. And so a lot of these research groups, like they started then, they were getting like, billions of dollars of funding. And now that program has ended and they're kind of like phasing it out. And now all of those academic researchers are trying to commercialize their technology, right? And so we kind of had a sense that we knew that sensory feedback was going to be like one of the big things probably in like 5 to 10 years. So we should build it in now. And so that our hand works with clinically available systems now, like a vibration motor, right? It's the same vibration motor that's in your phone, right? And when these like nerve implant stuff comes out, right? So for example, we have a collaboration with the University of Chicago, right? And there's a group out there that has a patient who was paralyzed from a car accident several years ago, and they actually put brain implants in him. And this was actually on 60 Minutes just like several months ago, earlier this year, and he, just by thinking, was able to shake the 60 Minutes host hand, because it was like recording those areas of his brain that correspond to his hand moving, even though he can't move his hand in real life. And then our hand was attached to a robot arm, and he was shaking the 60 Minutes host with our hand. And then they blindfolded him, and they started touching the fingers on our hand. And he was like, that's my index finger, that's my middle finger, that's my ring finger, because it was actually stimulating that area of his brain that corresponded to those areas, even though he couldn't feel them in real life, right? So obviously that technology, it's not going to be like commercially available for the next, like, in my opinion, like maybe 20 years, at least brain implants at least. But our hand works with those systems, right? It works with brain implants, it works with nerve implants, it works with like webcams, it works with joysticks, it works with vibration motors. We have a programming interface that allows any research to use our hand for like anything that they want to do, and including NASA. NASA actually
Meta,
has our
right?
hand.
Too.
And Meta has our hand too, and they're using it for like virtual teleoperation control. NASA wants to send it up to space so you can like do things on the International Space Station while you're on Earth.
Their arm they built's like just in Champaign, Illinois, is like used by NASA. That's like what's so crazy to me is like I said, these huge companies that are making these for so long, and he's just like, now NASA's like, oh, actually, like theirs is pretty good. Like, this kid's is good.
How did you make that connection with them? Like, how did that come about?
You know, so it's interesting. We make a lot of videos about our stuff, and so I mentioned a couple of them, like flaming board breaking and throwing the hand in a dryer and like dropping it from the roof of my house 30 feet in the air. I've arm wrestled the para triathlete national champion and I lost. We've done bottle flip tricks with it, if you guys remember that trend. Like, it's a lot harder to do with a bionic hand, but one of our patients, Kate, she was 17 when she got her hand, and she came over to our labs in Champaign when we were there. She was nailing these shots like on windowsills 2 stories up, and I was just like, what? This is absolutely nuts, right? And so when we post these on like LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook, then a lot of our followers are like who are in academia or like we're connected to notice. And so I had gotten a message on LinkedIn from the NASA folks saying like,
crazy.
yeah. And he was like, yeah, we heard that this hand can do some like cool stuff. We wanted to check it out. And I was like, are you serious? And that was great. That was a crazy day too, because then like we scheduled a call with them, and so we've got this demo where if you put your hand in front of a webcam, then you can actually control the hand, and you can actually do it remotely. So I can do it over Zoom.
Whoa.
And so I was setting this up for this call with NASA at the time, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, this is like NASA. And as the call starts, the fire alarm goes off in our building. And I'm like, I am so sorry. I have to leave right now because the fire alarm went off, and I will call you back in like 5 minutes, right? And so I'm outside the building, right? While everyone's like kind of like waiting for the fire trucks to come and everything like that. I'm just at like a bench, like outside with my laptop, and like, I got to get back on this call as quickly as possible, right? I get back on the call, and I'm like, I'm so sorry that I couldn't do anything about
sorry,
this.
NASA.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, NASA.
Like, it's fine. We're just on Mars waiting for you.
and so I'm like, so usually I have this demo set up where you can control the hand, and I'm going to try it, but I mean, it's not like the usual circumstances, but we're going to do it. And it worked flawlessly. And he was just like, so the NASA guy was just so impressed. He was just like, it's one thing for you to be able to like do a demo and get it to work in general, but for you to do it under these circumstances as well is just really impressive. And so I was just like, man, I don't know how I pulled that one off, but it definitely left a good impression.
It's almost a blessing.
How are they do you know how they're going to implement it?
Yeah, so the idea is that you'd wear like a VR headset, and then you'd kind of basically control this humanoid robot that has our hand on it. That it kind of looks like an astronaut robot as well. They call it Valkyrie, and when we actually went to Houston like 5 months ago, and on YouTube we released this video, which surprisingly has been going like somewhat viral over the last like like couple of weeks.
Oh,
I posted like 5 months ago, and now it's got like in the last 5 weeks, it's got like 300,000 views when it was at like 100 before or something. I was like, I don't know what happened, but yeah, something hit the YouTube algorithm, I guess. So you're basically wearing like a VR headset, and you're controlling this like giant humanoid robot with our hand on it to do like tasks that you would find on the International Space Station. So they have like this panel with like buttons and knobs and switches that you'll find there. And you know, one of the cool things was too, is that when we went down to Houston, we had a couple of our users with us, like patients who have our hand, and there were a couple of tasks that NASA were struggling with. Like they were like, I think it was like a zipper that they were trying to like unzip, and we were like, how would you do this, right? And so we had our users just go up to, and they just like easily like handle this zipper, right? And reminder, they're using the exact same hand, right? It's literally the exact same hand that's on the robot that's on them. I could take the hand off of the NASA robot and just slap it on them, and it would work totally fine. And the NASA engineers were like, we didn't even think about like doing it in that way. And I was like, oh man, we're like telling NASA engineers like how to do this kind of stuff. That's like so cool. I would never expected that would ever happen. So that was definitely a cool moment. My kids were there too, and they got to like see all of this like cool NASA stuff.
The NASA world in a very different way than like the tourist version.
Yeah. And I was just like, we took them out of school for that, because I was just like, if I were their age, like I would have killed for an opportunity.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, I was thinking, when I was like young, I saw like NASA like in Florida. We like went there and just like kind of did like a little tour, right?
Nice.
But like I wasn't like working on zippers. No, that is crazy.
Where do you think the tech is? Like, you were just saying how some of that stuff's not going to be commercially available for 20 years.
Well,
where's the finished job? How, like, what does it look like? What is the end goal, I guess? Like, where could these types of bionic hands go eventually, or bionic limbs in that matter?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on like how far we're looking out. Right. So I'll give you like the shorter term version, and then we can go into some of the longer term stuff. So short term, it's one of the major reasons why we moved to San Diego, actually. And so we just moved to San Diego from Champaign, Illinois last year. We've been there for just over a year now. And one of the big reasons was that we're working with the military hospital out there, and as well as University of California, San Diego. So I'm affiliate faculty there. Excuse me. And with them, we are doing kind of like the next generation of this stuff. So the way that you control these hands now, most typically, let's say you lost your hand below your elbow, you'd get like what we call a socket molded to you. It's kind of like if you broke your arm and you get a cast made. So it's like literally like thermoplastic and like fiberglass that they like mold to your like plaster of Paris or whatever, right? They get a mold of your residual limb. They make this cast out of it, and then basically you shove your arm into this, and then you place the muscle sensors like around there, and that's how you control like different functions on the hand, right? So the problem is it's kind of like wearing a shoe over your arm. You can imagine that gets like uncomfortable over time. There's a lot of friction. It gets hot. It gets sweaty. The sweat like messes with the electronics. Like fluorescent lights mess with the electronics and things like that. Those muscle sensors that go on the outside of your skin. And a lot of times it's just so uncomfortable that it's not worth wearing like a bionic hand, right? Because it's just not worth like the extra hassle you have to go through every day in order to use it. And so what we're doing with the military hospital is a couple things. So one is we're doing osseointegration. So what that means is that instead of having this thermoplastic socket that goes over your residual limb that kind of is like a shoe, we're taking a titanium like implant and then putting it inside your bones. And then it comes out of your body, and then you directly attach the hand to your bones, because that's how a limb is supposed to be attached, right? Like that's how our hands are attached right now, right? It's through our bones. And so it makes like a world of a difference. It feels like, a hand, like the weight distribution and things like that feels like a hand actually should, right? And then you don't have to worry about like things like rubbing up against stuff. Now, that being said, there is a chance of potentially like having infections because you have like a piece of titanium coming out of your body, right? But for a lot of people, it's literally just wiping it like with soap and water twice a day, and then it's totally fine, and you don't really have too much of an issue, right? So the second thing we're doing is, instead of having the muscle sensors on the outside of the body, we're actually implanting the sensors directly in your nerves inside your body, and then they come outside the titanium implant. And basically what that allows us to do is so the way we control the hand right now with muscle sensors, you can only really do pre-programmed grips. So you can do like a power grip or like a key grip or a rock on grip, right? But you can't really do individual finger control like the same that we can do that. With the nerve sensors directly implanted inside of you, that's what we think we can get to. And not only that, when you touch a finger, then we can stimulate your nerves, make it feel like it's actually coming from your hand. So we're hoping that we can start clinical trials on that within the next couple of years and potentially have someone play a piano or type on a keyboard again in the same way they would like with a natural hand. So that's kind of like in the shorter term horizon, right? Where I see this potentially heading longer term though, is that I see a market potentially for people without disabilities to get these nerve implants as well, right? And I can see myself even getting them as well, because let's say that I get like a nerve implant installed inside my arm. It basically replaces any remote control or mouse or my keyboard, any interface to digital like device, then I can control from my hand, because it can detect every single thing that my hand is doing. Even if I was like moving my hand like this and trying to do like a mouse click in the air, it would be able to detect that because it knows exactly what my hand is doing. But even crazier is that if I were interacting with something in a virtual environment, I can actually make it feel like I'm touching that thing that's not actually there.
Oh
right?
God.
That's insane. That's so crazy.
Because and honestly, I think that's one of the missing things about VR, right?
She would love that. Drew's got a couple ideas for you. Drew's like,
this is a multi-use market.
She's like, look, you're not gonna be a scientist to appreciate that, huh?
Yeah, but I mean, imagine being in VR and you're actually touching something and you can actually feel it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what's missing.
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly.
Is it?
Yep.
Honestly, with all the games and stuff, and just even being in these, like what Meta's trying to push.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel anything, it's still
That is like the gap. I feel like everyone's trying to bridge like that gap between, this virtual world and the physical world.
And I think one of the big problems with VR systems right now is that they're just clunky, right? Like you have to wear like gloves or like this headset and things like
Yeah,
that.
like Apple's new one is like just huge.
Yeah,
right. The Vision Pro.
Yeah.
And so if you can make something as seamless as just like, I mean, if it's implanted inside of you, you never see it. You never really need to interact with. I mean, you need to charge it, but that's like you can just wirelessly charge it or whatever.
Plug in. You gotta sit with your arm on like
exactly
like an IV.
Need some juice.
But the thing is, it's like this seamless interface that you don't need to like really mess around with, right? That is where I kind of see a lot of this technology going. I mean, like at some level, that's what Elon Musk's trying to do with Neuralink.
I was going to ask you about that.
So, and you have like some experience with like something around that, right? Or you have some.
Yeah, I mean, so we've worked with institutions who are doing brain implants, right? And very similarly to how Neuralink is doing it as well too, right? And I feel like it might be a little bit of a harder sell to convince someone to get a brain implant,
I think so too, yeah.
As opposed to like something in their arm instead. But I mean, I guess it all depends on how effective these devices are in the long run. It's a little bit too early to tell.
Yeah, and Neuralink didn't they have some like didn't they say it was like going to come out like a lot?
I was going to ask you about that. Like,
yeah,
in since you're
we talked about
you're an academic, you know about this stuff. Are his guesses on where this is going to be? Are they kind of shortcomings, or
just where Neuralink is at in general?
Yeah, like he says, within 5 years, 3 years, we'll have this, that. Do you think the things he said is kind of like
A little fluffy.
Yeah, a little fluffed.
Yeah, I think he knows that too.
Just raising money.
He's a great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
raiser.
idea is that you want to, what do they call it, a BHAG or whatever, like a big, hairy, audacious goal, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it at least sets the stage, right? That, this is where you want to hit, right? I mean, the same thing goes for like SpaceX, right? SpaceX wants to like have a colony on Mars within the next like 50 years, right? Whether that's possible or not, we don't know, but like at least there's something to be working towards, right? And I think that's the same idea that they're trying to do with Neuralink. A lot of this stuff I feel like they've shown so far has been done in academic research already. They've just done it in a cleaner form factor, I would say. But I mean, yeah, I guess time will just tell where a lot of it's going. I mean, I'm excited to see what they come out with. I think the whole field is exciting, and it's really nice that there's a lot of what do you call interest?
Yeah, like the
around it.
public interest in like what would be academia, like you were saying before.
Yeah.
Like they already did these things, they never left the lab, but now they've left the lab, and there's like hype around it, which
Exactly.
is pretty cool.
Yep.
And it's good inspiration probably for other people in academia.
Yeah, for sure.
How much of collaboration is there between like these research groups at universities and like the stuff that's coming out? Because like, explain to me about that. Because I'm curious, like when they come out with these research groups come out with something and they get implemented in these companies, are they like collaborating? It just goes into like public knowledge.
Would it be
this?
kind of like what you're doing with those universities now in San Diego, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, and so the thing is it's tricky with every situation, right? I mean, like even our work, it came out of the University of Illinois, right? As I was a graduate student there, right? And it all depends on like, I mean, honestly, I guess it comes down to who's like running it and what their goals are. I think the thing is for a lot of academics, the goal isn't really to like commercialize a product necessarily, right? It's to like get a journal paper in like the top like publication, and then that gets them like tenure somewhere, or like or just that next promotion or whatever, or like they're doing research for the sake of like furthering science as opposed to like benefiting humanity in a way that's like commercial. And the thing is that for us, like, I mean, at Psyonic, right, our big thing is that we want to make the most advanced bionic limbs, but we want to make it accessible to everyone, right? And so from the beginning, we had the goal that we wanted to get it covered by Medicare, because the thing is that if we can't make it accessible to everyone, then it's kind of like, what's the point, right? Like you've done this like incredible thing, but if only 2 people can have it, then like, have you really done much? Right. And so we will, like when we evaluate technologies like crazy fast, right? Like, so like the number of like pressure sensor technologies we've gone through like is like at least in like the dozens, right? And it'll take us like 1 to 2 weeks to like fully like to make a decision on like, we'll implement it and then we'll make a decision on whether it's worth pursuing or not. And a lot of it comes down to is it at a price point that like this touch sensor, like what can we afford to like make it at a price point that Medicare would cover? And if it's going to be like $100 sensor, no, we can't use it. Right. And so if one, it forces us to think in a different way, which is something I mentioned before, but 2, it also forces us to make sure that what we're making can actually be adopted by the masses, as opposed to like, again, like 2 people or like 3 people.
What is that like price point for some of the higher end prosthetics versus where Psyonic lives?
Yeah. So on the higher end, it can be like between like just for the hand, not even for like the socket and things like that, like between 30 to 60K.
Really?
Right? Yeah. And Medicare in the US will pay around 31K for the hand, but including the clinical services that the clinician provides for that hand, meaning that a 30 to 60K hand goes to a clinician, and then they're going to put their work on top of that and try to get that reimbursed for like 50 to 100K. And Medicare again only pays 31 for it. Right. So because of that, it's like they can't cover all of it. Right. And so our hand is priced at 15.5K, which is exactly like half of what Medicare on average pays for. And that way, when we sell it to the clinician for 15.5K, they can like double their margins, and then Medicare will pay for the hand or for most of it. Right? Yeah, everyone wins, right? And the patient just pays their copay or whatever. And so it's like, yeah.
That is incredible. That is massive.
Yeah.
Are you just in the United States right now?
Yeah. So clinically, we're just in the United States. For robotics, we're worldwide.
Okay.
So we've got like the hand in like, I think ETH Zurich in Switzerland, and some groups in the Netherlands and in Germany, and like all over. It's really exciting on that front too. And the thing is, like, we weren't actually initially planning on doing the robotics space necessarily. We kind of had it in the back of our minds, but it turns out that if you're building a robot to do human tasks, it makes sense that you use something that was optimized for humans to do human tasks, right? Yeah. So that's why it's literally the exact same hand that goes on humans. I can just pop it off of their socket, slap it onto a robot, and then it'll start working on the robot.
Wow.
And we have a robot dog in the lab too.
Is that the Boston one?
So we've done a video with a Boston Dynamics dog that was in Champaign, and so that was at a lab, Ji-Hyun Kim's lab at the University of Illinois. And so he made some arms that were like modular that he put on the Boston Dynamics dog, but he didn't have hands. And so it was literally the last thing I did before I left Champaign to San Diego. Like literally the day before, I got in a U-Haul and drove it across the country with all of our house and a Prius and like a third of the lab in tow, a 26-foot U-Haul. And it was absolutely nuts. But it was a great send-off from Champaign because we gave it some lightsabers, and I had a lightsaber duel against a Boston Dynamics dog using our hand.
Super
and
awesome.
I was just like, this is the coolest way to leave Champaign.
It's a great send off.
And then, and so the dog that we have in San Diego is actually from a company called Unitree. It's a Chinese company that makes their own dog that's very similar to the Boston Dynamics dog, and they have an arm that goes on, and we put our hand on the dog, and we've been having a lot of fun with that. So let's see what we've had it like drill into a piece of wood, or have her drill into a piece of wood. Her name is Abby, short for the ability dog. We've had her open doors now, and so we filmed this video for Halloween where basically I got like trapped inside the office, or like broke into the office, and I got trapped in, and then like the dog started.
Oh, I saw
me.
that, the lasers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and basically it was Jurassic Park where the dog learned how to open the door, and then I won't spoil how it ends for people who can go watch our video, but. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun having the dog there, and just like a couple days ago, it fed me Thanksgiving dinner too. So,
Could we get a little demo of the hand?
Yeah.
This
Oh,
is
yeah,
here. I'd love
absolutely.
to see it.
absolutely, yeah. So I've got the ability hand with me right over here, and so all 5 fingers flex and extend, and the thumb rotates as well. And so you can see that the best with this grip right over here. So this is what we call the finger wave, right? And so I'm controlling it with these 2 buttons right over here. But the most common way for users to control it, so if you're missing your hand below your elbow, is that you'd have a muscle sensor placed over your wrist flexor. So when you go like this, basically, right? And so that's this muscle right over here. And then another muscle sensor placed over your wrist extensor, which is in the back of your arm, like right over here. And so you can go back and forth like this, and that'll close and open the hand, right? So let me show you like this, right? So if I flex my muscles in, then I can close the hand. If I extended my muscle out, I would open the hand just like this, and I can go back and forth just like that, right? If I wanted to slow it down, I would just bend my muscles slightly, and then I can go like way slower with it, right? So I can get really precise control on it. I could like stop halfway if I wanted to, then continue on. When the hand is open, I just open it again just like that, and then it'll switch to the next grip. So there's a pinch. If I'm at a rock concert, I can rock on, right? And then you guys saw the finger wave. You can point with individual fingers. It's usually the first thing.
You want to point with?
Exactly.
Can you do a handshake?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. So yeah.
Do it right so the
all
camera
right,
can see it.
so let's do a handshake. Nice to meet you, Ray.
See, and it's not tight or it's not too hard or anything. So that's crazy.
incredible.
Didn't break me. That's cool.
Yeah, and so the finger is right here, right? So you can see they flex out of the way when I'm squeezing them like that, right? And so this was that silicone material that I was talking about, right? That we use soft robotics to approach this. So I can take this and I can smash it, and it totally survives the impact. That's why we can do flaming board breaking and drop it from the roof of my house and things like that. And then if you hold the bottom of this, do you feel the vibration coming through?
Yeah.
So that's the touch sensing. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 touch sensors, and in this one it's in the pinky, the index finger, and then the thumb. And that's how users can actually feel from the hand.
Do that a Ray too, so the camera can pick that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you feel the vibration that's coming through? Yeah. So there's touch sensors all throughout the pinky, the index finger.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's crazy. And when I first saw that, it was the sensors you would just like stick onto your skin, and they felt pretty intense back then.
Yeah, and so we're actually still doing research on the electrical stimulation stuff
it's
too.
so wild. Okay, so that's different than the electrical stimulation one.
Yeah, so
Oh,
this
I
is just
see.
through a vibration motor, right?
Okay.
That's in here. And so
Yeah.
with the electrical stimulation, the idea is that by changing, so we can send like current across your skin and make it feel like different things, like light touch, strong touch, pressure, vibration, pain, like the entire spectrum of what touch feels like. The hard part is to get it to consistently feel that way every single time, right? And that's what we're actively researching.
Feels wild.
Yeah. So have you ever gone to like, if you go to like CVS or Walgreens, you can pick up like an electrical muscle stimulator, or like a TENS unit, but there's like those patches that you put over your abs or whatever. And this starts like flexing your abs and things like that. Right.
I love how you put it. He like it sounds so complicated. He's like, yeah, you just go to Walgreens, grab an electrical stimulator,
a quick electrical
stimulator. Things for your abs, you throw it on there. It's basically the same.
It's the same idea.
But it is. It really is. And by changing the amount of like the electricity that's going through it and like the timing of it and like how much of it's going through, you can make it feel like different things. It'll actually stimulate your nerves in different ways to make it feel like a light touch or like it usually feels like a tingling sensation, like your arms waking up after it's fallen asleep. Right. And that's what we're trying to like move away from. So it doesn't always feel like a tingling, but we can always make it feel like you're actually touching something.
So textures and like
exactly.
Heat, cold, stuff like that.
Yep.
Wow.
Heat and cold is a little bit harder that way, but at least like texture and pressure and things like that. But when we go towards the implanted electrode stuff, I think heat and cold will actually be something that should hopefully be easier to kind of induce that sensation in someone.
Heat and cold, that's all like nerve stuff. Right?
Yeah.
That's all nerve stuff.
And like you can, there's been actually some studies that have come out very recently, actually within the last year, that have shown that you can like cool the skin rapidly enough and like heat it up fast enough that it can kind of feel like when you touch something here that's hot or cold, like with the temperature sensor, that it'll feel kind of like it's hot and cold on your skin. But I think still probably the best way to do it is by stimulating your nerves directly and making it actually feel like your brain is thinking that something is hot or something is cold by stimulating your nerves.
That is insane. You ever heard of this thing with amputees? They is it shadow pain?
Phantom.
Yeah. Does that like when you have a prosthetic that has haptic feedback, do you still get that, or does it reduce it a little bit? Do you ever hear testimonials?
That's a great question. The thing is that so we released this hand nationwide maybe in I think it was September of 2021. So like a little over like 2 years ago, and so we don't know yet.
Okay,
but that's one of the things that we're really excited to find out.
So I would think because they can kind of mitigate that or cure it like through using a mirror, right? And making you think the limb is still there. So wouldn't that kind of serve as like an even better treatment than a mirror is because now you have the hand. So you're kind of getting that mirror effect. So you know that.
So what do they do for right now?
They can like kind of, I think they put a mirror to where like your other hand is, and then you move that hand and you like kind of show your brain it doesn't hurt kind of is what I would think. Okay. And so like to the same effect, you kind of like have a limb there now. So no need for a mirror.
Theoretically, the thing is that I think a lot of it depends on how it feels, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have a socket, right, like the shoe that goes over your arm, it feels twice as heavy as like a hand typically does. It's not like loaded the same way a hand is,
especially
right?
if you're drilling yourself into. It's like even with that, like
that
could be
right.
Then maybe you could just shut that one off, that nerve when you're in there.
Yeah, maybe.
You're doing stuff anyways in there. Just turn that one off. No more of that.
And then like, the muscle sensors, it's like you're only controlling like these two movements to control like all these different grips, right? So it's not exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, you might not reduce like phantom limb pain because of that, right? Now the nerve implants that I keep going back to, right, where you can potentially move individual fingers and then like feel like actually that it's coming from your hand that's no longer there. I think that's got a better shot, but again, it's too early for us to be able to tell. So that's something that we're really excited to kind of like explore over the next couple of years when we start doing our clinical trials with patients.
Yeah, that's crazy.
From a business perspective, how does it work when you're like, how you worked on this for years before you commercially launched it? So you had to raise money to keep the operation going. Or is that your main focus now, is trying to go out and kind of spread the message and raise funding to keep the business going? Or how does that work, overall? Honestly,
It depends on the day.
Sure. Yeah.
Some days I'm like in the trenches with the engineers, just trying to like figure out like what the next generation of this hand is going to be like. Other times I'm like meeting with patients and clinicians and like just working with them on and like how to control the hand and things like that. And then other days, I'm like I'm going out there and like flying all over the world and talking about the hand and getting people on board. And so we had when we went through our first 5 prototypes, I think we spent a total of $5,000 in 4 years. So we run really lean, like super, super lean. And again, it forced us to think in different ways. Like when I said we didn't have funding for this stuff, I meant we really had no funding for a lot of this stuff. And to build like full hardware prototypes, right? Like 5 of them over the course of 4 years for less than $5,000, I think was just absolutely nuts, right? And so we raised like our pre-seed round in like 2019-ish, 2019, 2020. And we raised, I think it was like 1.4 million from like angel investors and like local VCs and things like that. And then we won several grants from the National Science Foundation as well throughout like 2017 to like now. And that totaled like 2.4 million in grants that we got from the government. And we've got hopefully a couple more potentially from like the DoD coming next year and things like that as well. And now we're actually in the middle of a equity crowdfunding round. And we were actually profitable last year and this year currently too. And so we don't necessarily need to raise the money, but the more we raise, the faster we can go with this stuff, the more people we can help, the more like amazing things we can do with like implanted electrodes and bionics and stuff like that. And we've raised, I think, close to 2.3 million on that from crowdfunding.
And that crowdfunding has like a minimum investment of like $250. So most anyone could probably get involved if they wanted to, getting in on that.
Where did the decision come to go with the crowdfunding versus going to other VCs or?
Yeah, that was interesting because, last year when we had like decided to go the crowdfunding route, it was probably the worst time in like history to raise from VCs because of like the economy and things like that. At least that's what every journalist was saying at the time, and I believe it. So and based on like the valuations I've been seeing and like the deal flow that I've been seeing from like other startups that I know and everything. So the other interesting thing about us was that, this is an FDA registered medical device, right? It's covered by, it's like, it has to be prescribed. It's like for clinical use and things like that. And it's covered by Medicare and insurance and whatnot, right? So what's atypical, what's not really typical for medical devices is for half of your sales to come from social media. Which last year half of our sales came from social media because our patients would see like our videos of flaming board breaking and bottle flip tricks, and they were like, we didn't even know that like you could even do these things with like prosthetic hands in general, right? And then they see how fast the hand moves and like the touch feedback and things like that. Again, things that they've never seen before in prosthetic hands, and they're like, how can I get that, right? And then they contact us, and then we reach out to them and their potential clinician. If they don't have one, we find one in their area, and then we're able to work with them for them to get the hand and cover it through their insurance. And so the thing is that we already had this huge like marketing push, and a lot of things that come through equity crowdfunding, you have to have like a big marketing like thing. And we had all these videos, and we were like, we can just use a lot of them for this. So that was one thing. And then, or I guess that was the second thing. The first thing being that the VC market just sucked at the time, and it still kind of is not fully recovered yet. And then one of the coolest things to come about it though was that our own patients have invested in the company. And I was just like, this is not an opportunity that they typically get, right? And so we get to build this for them, and then they get to be a part of the company that's building it for them. And I'm like, this is like the most beautiful, like reciprocal, like situation that I could think of. And that's been really cool. So having actually our patients like be a part of the company now, that's been really, really cool. And I'm grateful that they can have that opportunity as well.
It is amazing. Yeah, it was really unique to see that, like how you were doing the crowdfunding aspect of all that. And is there a big strategy behind your social media, or are you just kind of having fun with it and putting out videos that you think would be beneficial for people to view, or do you have like a whole content plan?
No, we definitely have a content plan. Yeah. And so it was really interesting because it was almost like a kind of like epiphany like moment that had happened. And so this was right before we did like our nationwide launch. We had what was it? We had fit a patient, the paratriathlete national champion in Chicago. So his name's Dan St. Pierre, and he hadn't really worn prosthetics at all, and he just didn't like them, and it was just too cumbersome. And so, but his clinician, Dave Rotter in Joliet, he's one of the best in the world. He convinced him to try this one out, and we were just like, oh my goodness, this is going to be like, this is going to be crazy, right? And so 3 minutes after he wore the hand for the first time, someone tossed him a water bottle, and he was able to catch it. and like, you know, like, one of my employees got it on film, and everyone was like going crazy, like in the lab when he caught it. We were just like, whoa, right? And we posted it on Reddit, and we posted in like the prosthetics channel, which doesn't have like many followers or anything like that. But there's one comment that just had struck me, and it was like, this is like the dude perfect for prosthetics. And I was like,
that's awesome. That's cool.
Dude perfect for prosthetics. And so the thing is, like, Bionics in general, I mean, like, it already captures like a lot of people's like interest, right?
Yeah.
So, but the thing is that what I'd seen from a lot of other companies were that they show like videos of like a 8-year-old kid like grabbing like a glass of orange juice and drinking it, right? And the thing that really bothered me about that was like all the public was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible, right? This 8-year-old kid can drink orange juice again. I was like, no, he could drink orange juice before. Like, he could just use his other hand. And most patients and clinicians know that they're still going to do most tasks with their other hand. Mm-hmm. Drinking the orange juice is not something they're really going to do with their prosthetic hand, unless it's just to like show someone that they can do it, right? And so when you show a video like that, it's not necessarily for the patients or the clinicians, it's more for the general public, right? And so we were like, okay, that bottle catching video, the thing is that every patient and clinician found that to be like amazing, because our hand moves so fast that it was actually able to have that speed to actually catch a water bottle that was thrown, and they'd never seen that before in their lives. So I was like, what are the things that we can show about our hand that both the general public will be like, Bionic hand doing that, that's cool, but also a patient and clinician will see that and they'll be like, I didn't know that Bionic hands could do this. And that's when we were like, flaming board breaking, right? Like, the biggest problem with like these $50,000 prosthetics are they're breaking all the time, right? You take one of those hands and you try to like break through like 3 boards that are on fire with that, I guarantee you they're going to get like destroyed, right? And so we were like, we need to show things that our hand can do that no other hand can do, but also will capture the attention of the public. Arm wrestling, right? Can it withstand the forces of an arm wrestling match? And we go into the science behind all of that, and like the physics of like what advantages like Dan St. Pierre had versus me, and then like who won in this this matchup, the bottle flip tricks. One of the cool ones that we haven't released just yet, but we did. So we had a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, which is like the biggest comic convention in the entire world, where they always announce like new Marvel movies and things like that, which is just a cool experience in and of itself. And we had like 5 of our users that we like flew in for this to have a panel there. But then we took them out to like what do you call like the K1 like go-kart racing. Yeah. And like we put GoPros on them, and we had our like first like Bionic like racing competition, and like we saw some of the footage. It literally looks like Mario Kart, like straight Mario Kart with a Bionic hand that's like behind the wheel. And I'm just like, this is really, really cool.
That is awesome.
Right. And so it's just like things like that, where it's just like, we went like paragliding with the hand. And so like one of our users, she just like took the hand paragliding, and like we're filming it like a day in the life of like what it's like to be her. And, excuse me. And she's just doing like crazy things. Like she took the hand, like golfing, and like she's doing like she was cooking with it and like doing like pancake flips and like all sorts of like crazy tricks. And I'm like, this is what we need to show. Right.
Yeah, that
like,
is so cool.
Yeah.
There's such a gap, like we were saying before, there's such a gap between how much things evolve and public interest, right? Like if there's public interest, things go quick.
True.
If there's not public interest, things don't go quick, which is like, that's another thing I was thinking about, like the scientific studies thing or with the research groups at these schools, like it's the point of furthering science, but to the general public, science isn't advancing unless it's something tangible that they can use.
Yep. Absolutely.
Which is like odd. I thought that they wouldn't do that, but.
And it's so why do you think that the prosthetics industry like wasn't really, it seems like they could have done this, right? Does that make sense? Like why do you think they didn't get to this point before? Or quicker.
To chime in before that, I was thinking this earlier when you were talking about how it was so hard for you to find your field of study for this, right? So like maybe just the options at college before.
Well, that as well. But like, I mean, the companies that were already doing it,
True,
it seems like,
true.
I mean, it wasn't really that like, it wasn't advancing that quickly.
Well, maybe they're making enough
and
money.
you would think the public interest would be there.
That's kind of what I was gonna say too, is that they didn't see a need for it. Yeah, I think that's a lot
Just
of what
wasn't being challenged, really.
Yeah, it wasn't. And I mean, honestly, 20 years ago, the technology wasn't there yet, right? I mean, like cell phone technology and things like that. Like you compare where it was 20 years ago to what it is now, right? And so things like 3D printing were huge. Things like, just microcontrollers being like smaller and accessible to everyone. There's like this brand of microcontroller that basically everyone starts off on now called Arduino. And like there's a ton of tutorials online. It's like this $20 thing that you can just plug into your computer, but you can then program it like with like super simple like programming language to control like any motor, your lights, and like a lot of people will use it for like Christmas lights and things like that, and like to make those like really cool like music synced like light things and etc. Right? And that's how we started. We started by finding like tutorials online with like these like very simple like off the shelf like $20 components that we could use to like control a motor, and then 6 motors, and then like 3D print things to like house them all together, and then like make fingers. And then like if you ever come to our like office, we have this in our lobby. We've got this like display area that has components of like every single hand that we've made over like the last like 9 years. And they're just like drawers full of just like finger bone designs and like palm designs and mold designs and like carbon fiber designs and like just all throughout the last like nine to 10 years. And it's like hundreds, if not like close to like 1,000 of these like different iterations and prototypes that went into all of this stuff. And so the thing is that when you compare us to like some of the bigger companies too, we're much more agile, right? Like I said, we can evaluate a new technology within like a week or two and then make a decision on whether we want to integrate it or not. And then the integration process only takes us like, like a couple months to like 6 months at most, like to get it inside a hand. And at some of these bigger companies, you can't do that, right? That you have like these manufacturing processes that are rigid. You have like all these like administrative red tape that like you have to go through and all these things like that. So I feel like all of those factors come into play on like why this kind of hasn't been done or taken advantage of before in that respect.
Are they starting to move on that more now that they are seeing you in the market? Have you been seeing people try a little bit more what you're doing?
Have you seen any reaction from like bigger players in the space to your hand?
Oh yeah. We know that we know that they're watching.
Yeah. That's kind of cool though. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. It's a cool position to be in. And the thing is that what's cool is that if you compare our hand to what it was like 2 years ago, completely. Well, actually, you would know because you've seen exactly what the hand has looked like 2 years ago, and 2 years before that, and 2 years before that, and 2 years before that. Right? It's been different every single time, and it's just been like this huge, like crazy growth. Right?
Giant leaps. Yeah.
And so 2 years from now, like our hand is going to be like a million times better than this thing already is right now.
It's going to be insane. Like, I mean, probably screwed into the arm, maybe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Screwed into the arm and screwed into your nerves as well. And actually,
is that the sleeve right there?
So this is kind of like the sleeve, right, where you could put your arm into the bottom of this. But instead, what this is that this is basically the same thing as this. The only difference is that it has a USB cable attached to the bottom of it. And we're going to do something fun here. So I keep talking about how like with nerve implants, you can control like individual fingers and things like that, right? So what we're going to do here is that we're going to actually have you guys control the hand. And so I'm going to put it in a mode that'll allow you to actually do that. So let me get it in that mode really quick. But this was a demo that we had first unveiled at like CES, the Consumer Electronics Show back in 2022. And it was like a huge hit. That was one of the videos that we had posted that NASA had seen. And they were like, what? Right. That's so cool. And that's, I think, what Meta had seen and like a bunch of other like robotics companies too. And so I think I've got it in the right mode now. And so if I did everything right, I'm going to take this USB cable, just plug it into the bottom here, and then let's see if this actually works.
This is wild.
Yes.
Hopefully it works. Okay, yeah, and it will. So this is what we're going to do. How should we do this? With Ray? Okay. All right, so Ray, so put your hand in front of the camera right over here.
Okay.
And then bend your fingers.
Oh my god.
That's
what?
Wait, it's the right
nuts,
fingers
dude.
too.
That's nuts, bro.
No way.
Get this on camera. This is insane.
What?
You better can do that. That's right.
and then can it?
So rotate your thumb in first. Yeah, exactly. And then try and make a pinch. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
It's
So
just
you gotta
reading off the
learn it a little
webcam?
bit.
Yep.
That's so cool. What? Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. You guys want to try it?
Let me get that.
We're all like 12.
That is wild, dude.
It's usually the first thing that our patients ask is if they can flip someone off.
Yeah.
You know what is crazy about this is just like the response time of it. Like the response time of this
Right.
was wild.
And this is running off of my cell phone, right? This is running all the machine learning algorithms and like the hand tracking and all of that stuff in real time.
Here, 1 second while you guys do this. That's so cool.
That's so cool. How in the hell did you figure this out? That is nuts. What? That is so cool. That is wild. And you have that in the front office, you were saying too, like with the two hands?
So yeah, you can do it two hands at the same time in the front office in our lobby. And so that level of control, right, that you guys just did there, that's where we want to go with this in the future, right, with the nerve implants. So you can imagine someone playing a piano or typing on a keyboard, but you can also imagine someone on Earth controlling the hand like you just did, the hand being up in space, and then you grabbing something like on the space station or something like that.
And I can't imagine the iteration you're at now and like the iteration you're gonna be at, it's bound to advance. Like, you know, how focused you guys are and, you know, just the level that I've seen. I feel like a regular company like this would not advance this fast, but I don't know if it's the group of guys and girls you have working there, the focus. Like, do you mind me asking, how many people do you have in your team there?
So right now, I think we've got about 19 or 20.
See, that's wild. That's wild.
That's nuts. That's impressive. It's really impressive.
Like for the size, it's impressive because of like, I would say innovation. Like that's like the innovation you guys are making, like back to back in these different iterations is crazy.
Is it hard with like the fine motor skills component of it, like trying to make the finger? Like that's insane how it could literally curl every bit. I mean, that's wild, especially as you're going to probably iterate on that more. I mean, that's got to be the toughest. That's probably one of the hardest parts to do, right?
Yeah, and so I like right now with the state of technology of where it's at, the harder part is to get a user to be able to control like that individual finger control really finely, right? And that's why we're heading towards the nerve implants, because then you can potentially control each individual finger at that level. And so we're working on like machine learning algorithms the same way that instead of using the camera, you would just read the nerve data into the machine learning algorithm instead, and then the AI would like figure out all the the movements associated with the finger movements.
Would that also be utilized for some, like on the robotics end of doing it, like if someone's in space and doing that type of thing? Would they have a nerve
Theoretically, yeah,
implant and they would
absolutely.
just- wow.
Absolutely.
Next level.
And so, yeah, the thing is, if I got an implant like that, I could certainly control the hand in a very similar way that someone with an amputation would. And it's almost like it levels the playing field, that the same thing that we're making for people with limb differences is the same thing that people without limb differences want, right? And can use and on a daily basis.
It'll be crazy when it gets to the point, obviously far down the future, where people are maybe chopping off their hands to put one of these on.
When he's gonna put guns in it, all that.
That's the next iteration. Maybe you need a flamethrower. Maybe you take some notes out of Elon Musk. Maybe you need to throw a flamethrower in there.
We'll get the Boring Company flamethrower. And
that's crazy. that is, now that you were saying about the spacing, I think about that is like a game changer for like, you know, all the fine motor skill stuff that I don't even know how. I mean, stuff on like the rover,
Turning knobs. Or
like all the little
switches.
stuff they have to do, like that stuff would be like. Even have an arm on there, like that's nuts.
Well,
that's crazy.
And if it could be like resistant to those different temperature levels and like all those different things, and that's like a pretty big game changer, right?
An unmanned space station doing everything that humans
and what
are able
it could
to do
too. I mean, you don't even need like a rover. Maybe you could just hook that thing up and let it crawl across Mars and go over there and just flip it back and then run backwards. Like, can you turn that on? Let it run.
Absolutely.
So this is how Mars is gonna look soon. Just like a bunch of arms running around, like, and everyone's got like VR headsets here on Earth, like interacting on Mars.
Is it going to be walking or?
Yeah. You need this too?
No. All right, let's see if I can do this. So I got to connect to this over here. And then. All right. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3 this right. Let's see. It's like Wednesday.
You literally.
Oh, that's exactly what I was thinking about.
Is it still
There it
alive?
goes. It's still alive.
That is so cool.
That's crazy.
How does that even? That's insane. Because
So you can imagine on Halloween we have a lot of fun with them.
I can imagine, yeah. That's so cool. It's just
The amount of things you can do with this. Right?
better than a hand.
Who would have thunk a hand could be so useful?
So entertaining.
A working hand. You can do so much with it.
You do so much of these things.
I know this is completely not different, but obviously, yes, different limb. Like, is there as much application for like? I know you guys are just focused on hands, but like feet stuff.
Good
or
question. He's
legs?
got a lot to talk about there.
Yeah. And so we moved to San Diego, right? And so again, a bunch of reasons why we moved to San Diego. One, it's military hospital, UCSD, and things like that. It's also we're like located 10 minutes away from the Challenged Athletes Foundation, which is one of the world's largest like nonprofits for funding people with disabilities to do sports. So they hold the Pair Triathlon like every year and things like that, right? And they sponsor like a bunch of like Paralympic athletes and Paralympics itself as well. And so we have a 5-year goal of making an ability leg that you can do a triathlon in. And the same motor technology that's in the fingers is directly applicable to wrists and elbows, as well as knees and ankles. And so we're talking about bone integration and nerve integration. The ideal situation would then be that we have someone with direct, like if they're above knee amputee, direct bone implants into their femur, like the nerve implants from their nerves going in there to control like your knee, your ankle, and like your toes. And then you have a leg that you can run, bike, and swim with.
Wow.
That is a game changer. Wow, that'd be really cool.
That might make you really fast. Like I feel like that could be like a pretty big advantage. Maybe if like the leg is working really well, and well, it's like that thing where people have those certain
blades,
legs.
yeah,
the blades. Like people
yeah.
feel like it might be an advantage, right? So like if you have a leg that could also have like a jet engine on it or something, you know, who knows? Who knows, right?
Yeah. I mean, the current tech.
You get there before the rule books catch up.
Yeah. I mean, the tech for like hands and legs, it's separate, obviously, right? But it's the same, like lack of advancement in legs, kind of the same thing, or is it a little bit different because there's not as many fine motor skills, right?
It's almost like an inverse problem, right? So for your hand, the idea is dexterity is the big thing. So you want to control as many things as possible. For your leg, it's stability is the big thing, right? You never want your patient to fall ever, right? And so it's fewer motors, but they need to support like a ton of weight. They need to be like super impact resistant as well, because like you're going to be like shifting dynamically on that, right? You don't want them to fall. But there's a much more limited amount of things that you do. There's like walking, there's stair climbing, there's like running and like, swimming, exactly. And all of those are kind of like cyclical movements, right? Like repetitive cyclical movements. So the control is theoretically simpler than doing like the dexterous control that you would do in like a hand, but you need to be able to do those stably and consistently over time without like falling. Yeah.
So how do you compare, like, I think about like with like self-driving cars, they say like, well, like someone says, well, what if they crash? It's like, well, people crash too. It just has to be better than people maybe, or as good. So how do you compare like how often people fall versus like what's a good leg and a bad leg based on falling? Cause you could fall without that limb or you could fall with it, right? Like I could fall.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, if you don't fall 9 out of 10 times, it's a pretty good leg.
Yeah, you know, so there's,
right? Like, I mean, there's got to be some like liability portion to it, or at least like morally, just like some aspect of like when it's good for release.
yeah, and so there's been a lot of studies that have been done like on both like able-bodied individuals as well as people who are missing a leg, and basically they're almost like trip studies, like where they'll attach something, like you're walking on a treadmill and then like they'll attach something to like your foot, and then every so often they just like yank on it, and then they see how you recover. Like,
Oh, I see. So it's like a reaction time thing.
exactly, right? And so not just reaction, but like how do you shift like your weight and your balance so that you don't fall, or how do you fall when something like that actually happens, right? But more importantly, how do you recover from something like that? And so if you've ever seen like, you know, those videos where you like kick the Boston Dynamics dog and then it just shifts and then redistributes its weight so it doesn't fall over. The same thing with like their Atlas humanoid robots, like you like push it and then it like figures out like how to readjust itself. That's the kind of thing that you need to put into the leg itself, like modeled off of like how humans like recover from that.
That is so cool. And I feel like I could just like imagine like it's like a human that you just like can't push over because like their legs are just programmed to not let them fall. you know what I'm saying? Like the guy's like sleeping, he's like still standing.
Yeah, I imagine probably somewhere in like, you know, deep in the government, there's probably has to be some deal going on with some type of like, you know, advanced research where they put like a gun in the arm or something crazy. Sure, something.
Is this true?
we don't condone the use of firearms.
Of course not.
But,
is the problem with the leg, it's just kind of on that topic, is it the shape of the leg, or is there a lot of like nerve, like a lot of muscular stuff going on to keep you balanced, or is it a mix of both?
It's a mix of both.
Okay.
I mean, your bones are providing you with structure as well, but I mean, like your quads are huge.
Yeah, there's
right?
like weird stability
huge,
muscles
yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Like
right.
in
Your
ankles.
hamstrings, your quads, they're like some of the biggest muscles in your body, right? And they're meant for stabilizing you. So when you're standing, when you're sitting, when you're walking, etc. And so there's a lot of control that's going into just like having you stand and not fall over, right?
Yeah.
And it's those types of things that we would need to like read the nerves and make sure that that's what we're trying to get to. Or if you want to just even like lift your knee up and then like kick your leg out and then just do that, that is like, that's like hard. That's that's a pretty hard problem for like to figure out at a general level. Like you can make a machine learning algorithm do that, but to do it when you want to every single time consistently, that's when it gets tricky.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's insane, the amount of stuff that has to go into it. You don't think about it as a regular, I mean, if you have all of your limbs, you never consider these types of things.
Yeah.
It's never on your mind until something goes wrong and you need it.
Yeah, and all the little microprocessors it needs to adjust for. Yeah, I'm sitting here silent thinking, I'm like, it needs to adjust for this, that. I'm like, man, this is complicated.
What is your guys' goal as a company, you know, over the next like 5 to 10 years? Like you were talking about the triathlon, but outside of that, just
like business
goals in 5 years, and then just like where do you see the iterations going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so a lot of more seamless integration between humans and machines, right? So through direct nerve interfaces, as well as direct bone interfaces, regardless of where the limb is. And then I think that there's supposedly supposed to be a huge boom in humanoid robots in the workforce and like that.
Within like manufacturing processes, right? Yeah,
Yep.
Scary but cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing is that all the statistics show too that there are like labor shortages, like specifically for manufacturing. And even if every single person was employed, who's unemployed in the United States, was actually employed in a manufacturing job, there would still be like 2 million
Seriously?
or plus jobs, like manufacturing jobs that are unfilled. And so a lot of people don't seem to think that there's not a labor shortage, but statistically, there actually is one.
There's a problem to solve.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so there is potentially a huge boom that's going to be happening on the humanoid robot side. And for every humanoid robot you build, you need 2 hands, right? So, and fortunately for us, it's been literally, like I said, the exact same hand that's been going on humans that the robots have been using too. And if we hit those volumes, then the great part is that then our prices will go further down too, that maybe at a point that we can actually have Medicaid and like uninsured people be able to get hands. Wow. And so we actually have a subsidiary of the company called the Psyonic Institute. And the whole mission of the Institute is to work with nonprofits to subsidize the cost for people who can't afford the hand. And actually our very first recipient was just a month ago. It was Juan from Ecuador.
Oh yeah.
So our very first patient that we had met back in 2014 that kind of like was the launching pad for all of this when he made a pinch with his left hand for the first time in 35 years in Ecuador with our hand that was like Mark II of the ability hand that was 3 times the size of an average adult human hand with wires going everywhere, to a month ago where we finally delivered him the latest version of the hand that he's using on a daily basis.
8 years, 9 years later?
9 years later.
Do you remember you?
Wow.
Oh yeah.
You're like, yo, you remember me? He's like, no. You're like, well, I got you a hand.
So we'd gone down. I think that was like my 5th trip
so
to Ecuador,
cool.
and so he'd tried out like Mark 5, Mark 6, and Mark 8 of the ability hand. So the last time we were there was 5 years ago, and COVID happened, and then we decided to go down now, and we feel confident in our hand at this point too that it can actually be used on a daily basis by like users without much issue.
And wasn't it just put in for clinicians to, you went through something so that it's like commercially available and could be prescribed. How did that work again? We got FDA registration. So yeah, we got registered with the FDA in the US so that we can sell it clinically.
Is that a tough process?
Honestly, it was pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And then for insurance to cover it, the biggest thing was just getting at a price point that they would cover it at.
Weren't there like clinicians that you were like working with, or like some organization or network of them or something like that you were working on?
That was working.
That you were working with, like, to get into, so that they would be like prescribing it. It was like only like certain people are able to prescribe these things.
Yeah. It has to be done through, well, I guess like a physician, right? So it's usually like the surgeon that does it. But then you've got to work with a clinician known as a prosthetist, right? And so one of the nonprofits we partner with, the Range of Motion Project, they have prosthetists who are in like Guatemala.
I thought there was like a network where there was like a certain amount of these like within the US too, though, and that was gonna be like really good for sales of the hand in general.
A certain amount of them in the US.
I was like misunderstanding it, but I thought there was like a network of these things. Think of them like Athena Health or something like that, and it was like this like brand that you're working to get into that could prescribe them and have them kind of ready to go.
There's like the biggest chain of prosthetics clinics in the US, Hanger Clinic.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's maybe like around 1,000 like prosthetics clinics in the entire US, and like 800 of them are one company. They're called Hanger.
That's what.
And so yeah, we're available in Hanger across the entire US.
That's what I remember hearing about. Yeah, that was like kind of a cool thing to be part of.
Yeah, and it's amazing working with them because their network is just so huge that like, you could be out in like rural America and then you can probably still find like a Hanger clinic nearby. Now, the issue is that you might not have an upper limb specialist around in that area, but they've got like a bunch that can fly over and that covers that area. And we've worked with many of them already. So, and so working with them, that's been very great in the US. And then as we go abroad, though, we'll have to partner with clinicians that work abroad, so that we can serve like places and with Gaza, like with the kids like losing all their limbs there too. I mean, I've been getting a lot of emails about that too. And then Ukraine as well. And like a bunch of just these war-torn areas, like how can we deploy the hands there? And we're still trying to figure a lot of that stuff out because it's not as simple as just like, here's a hand, you're good to go, right? Yeah. You need to provide support. You need to provide training. And then when like, if someone takes like a chainsaw to the finger and then like the finger like breaks because of that, how do they get that like fixed and repaired and things like that? And so there's a lot of those types of things that we're going to be working through over the next years to just see like how can we actually deploy this in places that are resource limited and don't have as much like money as the US.
That's so cool.
Is that harder to get into from just because there's almost lack of structure out there and lack of funding for those types of things? Or
is it just a distance
thing? Is it just a distance? Yeah. Is it like a location thing or more of...
Or is there regulation? Like it's FDA approved, but could you just ship it to any country without...
I mean, there's some regulatory things, and I mean, that's doable. That's not the hard part. I think the more part is like having this infrastructure for like a clinical team to be there for a patient that can continuously be there for that patient. Because in the US, the first line of defense is their prosthetist. They're working with their prosthetist here. They don't have one there. Then it's like, if something goes wrong, who do they go to, right? And then if we don't have someone like in that area, then it's like we have to then like ship something like overseas, and like how long is that going to take? And then like how does that go back and forth with them? It's not it's tricky. it's tricky, but I think it's solvable, and I think it's going to be an exciting area for us to figure out as well. Because again, that's the whole reason why I got into this, right? Was because when I went to Pakistan and I saw that little girl there, right, who was missing a limb, there's no way she could afford a $15,000 bionic limb, right? But if we can get it to a price point that she can afford, or it's donated through her, through people like other people who have like purchased it for him through or for her through the Institute, then we've got something that might actually be able to be scaled globally for patients worldwide.
That's so cool.
That is what's been the hardest part about building this entire company?
There have been so many things that have been really hard. I mean, just like with every startup, it's always a roller coaster, right? And there were times where like back in the summer of 2017, we went to China for like 2.5 months. And that's where we found our motor and our gear manufacturers, right? My wife was 6 months pregnant at the time. Our son was like 1.5 years old. Like our director of engineering was with us. He just graduated from undergrad at the time. And like we had like 4 other like student employees with us in a small high rise in Shenzhen, and only one of us spoke Chinese, and it wasn't me. And so it was absolutely nuts. But we still work with like the motor and gear manufacturers like to this day, right? So it was a very important trip that we made. But we had tried raising like an Indiegogo campaign around that time, and we were hoping to raise like, I think it was like, I don't remember, 250K or something like that. We ended up raising 7K. Oh. And at the end of that year, we had $200 left in our bank account. And we were just like, I had to make a decision on whether I was going to finish medical school or not, right? And so I guess what it came down to was that we had applied for our first grant from the National Science Foundation, the first government grant. And we found out like basically in the last week of December that we were getting that grant. And so we had $200 in our bank account in the last week of December. The first week of January, we had $200,200 in our bank account, which was more money than we had ever seen before. And we were just like, what? So you hit your low lows, but then you like hit your high highs. And as long as like that, the trend is just like going upwards, then that's you're doing okay. Yeah. Moving across the country was really tough as well. There were 7 of us when we moved. 7. That was it. And so we have like basically tripled in size in the last year from moving there. But 7 of us were making all the hands that were going out. We're doing all the research. We're trying to like figure out all this manufacturing during COVID when there was like this, an electronics shortage that was happening. And there is like all sorts of like manufacturing and supply chain issues and things like that. So you always run into these types of issues. And like the most important thing is just to have the grit to get through it. Fortunately, this is what I've wanted to do my whole life. So one way or another, I'm going to figure out how to get it done. So that helps, but it's tough. It's definitely tough.
Especially in an industry that's not like, doesn't have a blueprint. You're not opening like a marketing company.
True. Yeah.
like there's
Slow down. Come on.
I'm just saying, there's no blueprint for what you're doing.
Right.
You're making like innovative products, and like that space can be like, I feel like they could eat you and swallow you up and spit you out.
Not a lot of podcasts you can listen to about how to, right?
No.
Very true.
No.
That's insane. Yeah. I feel like that is one of the most important parts is the grit. And I feel like it's funny because every entrepreneur has a similar story where like you get these really deep lows and then you have these really, really high highs, which is it's just part of the journey, I guess.
Absolutely.
What was been the biggest thing too? Cause obviously you have a wife and kids and a whole family. How has that been very difficult to manage building the business, managing your friendships, your family, managing all that? How is that? How have you dealt with that?
Well, I mean, and so if you look at my time cards on average, it's like 70, 80 hours a week, right? So, I mean, it's definitely like, it takes up a lot of my life, right? So interestingly, when we moved to San Diego, one of the like stipulations that I had was that first we figure out where the company is moving to, and then wherever we move to has to be within 10 minutes of wherever Psyonic is. And that was because I didn't want to waste any time on a commute, because that's like time that I could be spending like with my family and things like that. And the area of San Diego we're in is like amazing. It's called Scripps Ranch, and it's like 15 minutes away from like everything, from the Navy hospital, from like UCSD, from like the Challenge Athletes Foundation, from the ocean. And then like the airport as well is only like 20 minutes away from us too. But the kids' school is like 3 minutes away from Psyonic and where we live. And it's like some of the best schools in all of California. They're like public schools. They're not like private schools or anything like that. And it's just like the space that we've got is 2.5 times bigger than what we had in Champaign. And like we've decked it out to make it look super cool and everything too. And so all of that has like, it kind of like fell into place. I mean, the kids have been to Psyonic quite often, right? I mean, it's become almost like a second home to them too, which is kind of cool because it's like, man, I wonder what it would have been like growing up, like being able to have access to like this cool robotics lab, right? That's making like these bionic hands and things like that.
Really good influences on the kids.
Yeah. And what's cool is that they're like super excited and proud about it too. Like just yesterday, we were at like McDonald's with a friend. And my daughter was like, just met someone there and she was she walks up to me and was like, can you show my new friend the bionic hand? And I was like, awesome. Wow, that's the first time that had ever happened where she had met a stranger and was like, my dad makes bionic hands. Can you show,
that's cool. They recognize it. Like that they're not just like, so, you know, it's not normalized to them or anything. They get that it's like really, you know, really cool.
And I think that for them, it's like a source of pride too. And I guess for me too, it is as well. And that's like, it's been really, really awesome. And and the fact that I mean, Whitney works for the company as well, right? She's our director of HR, but she also like has sewn all of the like the waterproof sleeves on the hand, and like she painted all the walls in the new place too. And she's like a jack of all trades. Kind of all of us are. We're all wearing many hats. There's only like now 20 of us, 7 of us last year, right, doing all of this stuff. And so it's turned into like a family thing. And in fact, I think the company incorporated literally like a week before my oldest son Zane was born. So I always know how old the company is based on. Like,
that's so cool, actually.
Zane is. So
that's awesome. That's incredible. So how do people get involved with like Psyonic, and what kind of thing are you looking for with that in terms of whether it be investors, people who are trying to like follow it, or also people who need the prosthetic? Yeah.
So, I mean, in all of those ways, I mean, we're always looking for investors, especially with our equity crowdfunding campaign going on right now. So that's one of the big ways to get involved. If anyone knows anyone who could use a hand like this, especially in the US for now, then we'd love to reach out to them. And also, especially on the institute side of things, where we're trying to, get funding for people who can't afford hands. One of my goals is that I want to get on Jimmy Kimmel and have him arm wrestle the hand.
You've actually been saying that for a while, I think, which is cool. That's still a goal. That's awesome.
Exactly. And I think we can make it happen.
I think so. I mean, totally. You're trending that way, it seems, right?
Any of those ways to help out, like we would love to have people involved.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, we appreciate you on here. I mean, this is so cool. I'm glad you guys got to see it in person.
Coolest fucking podcast we've done.
By
far.
This is amazing. You guys thought this was cool, share it with whoever. Subscribe to us. Follow Psyonic. It's at Psyonic Inc. PSYONIC. And they also have psyonic.io/invest if you want to look at their ways to invest in them. But share it around, help some people. Right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
This is a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Peace.
Do that.